Jai Shri Radhe, so Vaishnav and Jai Shri Krishna. Continuing with our stories of the 252 Vaishnavas of Sri Gosaiji. We are in Varta 191, Beni Das, continuing from yesterday. One day there was a big rainstorm. The rain was very strong, and Beni Das wondered how he could venture outside with his Sri Thakurji. In that place lived one Brahmin, and Beni Das asked him if there was any place nearby where he could shelter for a while. The Brahmin replied, there is not really any place nearby which would be big enough for your whole group. There is one building, but there is a ghost who lives there. Beni Das replied, I am not at all worried about any ghost. The Brahmin showed him the mansion, and Beni Das went there. He swept and cleaned the place up. Beni Das entered with his Sri Thakurji's Seva and started to cook. He made the offerings to his Sri Thakurji. After accepting back the Mahaprasad, the Vaishnavas and Beni Das partook of that prasad, and that night they all went to sleep there. In the morning the Vaishnavas were getting ready to set off when the ghost came there. Beni Das uttered the names of Sri Acharyaji and Sri Gosaiji, and the ghost began to cry and then ran away. Bhav Prakash. Doubt arises here as to why Beni Das used the names of Sri Acharyaji and Sri Gosaiji to ward off the ghost, an act which would be regarded as troublesome for them. This is not the way of the path of grace. Here it is stated that Beni Das had only recently become a Vaishnava and wanted to see the effect Sri Acharyaji's and Sri Gosaiji's names would have on the ghost. There is another reason here. Beni Das was responsible for his Sri Thakurji, and he did not want him to suffer in any way on account of the ghost, and so countered the ghost using the Sri Acharyaji's and Sri Gosaiji's names. Hearing these names alone made the ghost run away, whilst becoming incapable of doing any harm. This demonstrates the power of their names. Jivan Das had previously also used Sri Acharyaji's oath to stop the rain. This event is in the same mood. This tale reveals the divine power of Sri Acharyaji's and Sri Gosaiji's names. Part 1 continued. The Vaishnavas returned home. How powerful Sri Acharyaji is! Beni Das began to serve his Sri Thakurji, and it was not long before he began to experience the Lord's direct presence. He would ask Beni Das for whatever he wished. After some time, Beni Das, through the Lord's will, attained to his lotus feet when he left his body. Thus concludes Varta 191, the story of Beni Das, who was the recipient of Sri Gosaiji's great grace and an accomplished Vaishnava. Continuing on to Varta 192, the story of one Vaishnava from Gujarat whom Sri Gosaiji revealed his greatness, Bhav Prakash. This is a devotee of Rajasi disposition. In the eternal Leela, his name is Kamalakant, who manifests from Mohini and is thus a personification of her divine loving sentiment. Part 1. At one time, Sri Gosaiji had travelled to Dwarkaji to have the holy site of Rancholalji. On the way he came to one village and set up his camp there. There were many Vaishnavas living in that village, and this Vaishnava was among them. He caught sight of Sri Gosaiji and immediately requested him to initiate him with the Lord's name and accept him as a disciple. Sri Gosaiji instructed him to go to bathe, and he did so. Sri Gosaiji graced him by initiating him with the Lord's name and Brahmasambandh. The Vaishnava now asked Sri Gosaiji where his duties lay, and Sri Gosaiji instructed him to serve Sri Thakurji. The Vaishnava requested Sri Gosaiji to let him serve him and to allow him to travel with him. Sri Gosaiji agreed and then set off for Dwarkaji. This Vaishnava was always reading and waiting and to serve Sri Gosaiji, and served him very nicely. Sri Gosaiji remained in Dwarkaji for quite some time, having the holy site of Sri Rancholalji before setting off on the journey back to Gokul. On the way, Sri Gosaiji stopped and set up camp. He cooked and made offerings to Sri Thakurji. All the Vrajavasi Sevaks were engaged in his service when suddenly a huge black cloud blew overhead, bringing darkness. This Vaishnava then asked Sri Gosaiji, "Oh, what should we do now?" Sri Gosaiji called out, "Oh cloud, don't come any closer. I am from Anyor." Bhav Prakash. In saying this, Sri Gosaiji revealed his true form. He is Sri Nandakumar himself, who had held Sri Govardhan hill aloft for 7 days and dispersed the rainfall sent by Indra. Thus he revealed his form. Gopal Das Ji has sung, Sri Krishna, the Supreme Divine Personality, sports in a unique way. For 7 days he upheld the Sri Giriraj mountain on his little finger and dispersed the rainstorm sent by Indra. Thus it was shown that the Supreme Lord here appeared in the form of a Brahmin, Sri Gosaiji. Part 1. At that very moment the cloud blew away. Sri Gosaiji thus showed his divine form. Sri Gosaiji accepted the offerings back as prasad, of which he partook, and then fed all the Vrajvasi sevaks. He proceeded to Gokul, and this Vaishnava accompanied him. He had the holy sight of Sri Navneet Priyaji. Sri Gosaiji then went to Sri Natadwara, and the Vaishnava again went with him. He had the holy sight of Sri Govardhanaji. Thereafter Sri Gosaiji engaged the Vaishnava in Sri Nathji's Seva, and he continued to serve the Lord very nicely until the day he died. Thus concludes Varta 192, the story of the Vaishnava from Gujarat. He was a recipient of Sri Gosaiji's great grace and an accomplished Vaishnava. There is no end to his tale. And proceeding again from here to Varta 193, the story of one Gujarati Brahmin whose home was invaded by a thief in the disguise of a Vaishnava. Bhav Prakash. This is a devotee of Tamasi disposition. In the eternal Leela, his name is Manotsav, who is the daughter of one of Sri Nandaraji's bards named Uma Shankar. She manifests from him and is thus a personification of his divine loving sentiment. He was born into a wealthy Brahmin family in Gujarat. He was the only child of this Brahmin who was very affectionate towards him. When he was 11 or 12, his parents married him off. An epidemic spread through the area, and his parents died, and he and his wife were left alone at their home. Once Sri Gosaiji was travelling to Dwarkaji, he arrived in this Brahmin's village and set up camp on the banks of the lake. At that time, the Brahmin had come there to bathe. He caught sight of Sri Gosaiji and, realizing that he was a great being, had the wish to take shelter in him. After bathing, he approached Sri Gosaiji and humbly requested him to accept him as a disciple. Sri Gosaiji graced him with initiation with the Lord's name and Brahma Sambandh. He went home and fetched his wife and son, whom Sri Gosaiji also initiated. The Brahman inquired of Sri Gosaiji, "O Maharaj, what should I do now in order to perfect my devotional path?" Sri Gosaiji instructed him, "You should make seva to the divine beloved Lord and keep the company of Vaishnavas. Constantly chant the 8-syllable mantra. In this way you will be fulfilling your divine righteous path." The Brahmin requested Sri Gosaiji to grant him one Sri Thakurji to serve, and Sri Gosaiji gave one Swarupa of child Krishna into his responsibility. He also taught him all the ways of seva, and the Brahmin, along with his wife, began to serve their Sri Thakurji with great love. They also paid great respect to all the Vaishnavas. They put them up in their house, and thus benefited from their wise association. They never stopped chanting the 8-syllable mantra of dedication and never forgot it even for a second. It was not long before they attained devotional perfection. Their speech was also perfected. Whatever they said came true. They perceived everything without judgmentalism and never found fault in anyone. All the Lord's divine pastimes became visible to them, and the Lord granted them his direct experience. So we'll pause here today and continue tomorrow in this Varta 193. Sab Vaishnavan ko sadar, Sadhenya, Sananda, Saprem, Jai Shri Krishna, Jai Shri Radha Ji.